All right, Trip, I've got 2 o'clock, so I'm going to get started. Hello and good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Dodds, and I am the President and Chief Operating Officer of Kencor, which is an AEG company. I am also the Chairman of the NAEC Member Services Committee, and I want to welcome everyone to this second town hall discussion in what is becoming a series of dialogues with various leaders within the vertical transportation industry. These town hall events will continue to focus on topics that have been identified by NAEC members as important and significant to their business. Topics will continue to range from immediate needs that you face on a daily basis to the longer objectives related to the long-term sustainability of a successful business. The topics for the town hall sessions have been assembled from an all-member survey into topic clusters, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Sean Madden for his assistance with that endeavor. As always, if you have any feedback on this event or if you have any ideas about future town hall events, please reach out to Trip, and you can reach Trip at naec.org. So today's topic is about the 2019 code update and AHJ interpretations, and we're going to touch on how codes are developed. The event will last for 1.5 hours, ending at 3:30. As each of us do our best to put safety first for our employees, our customers, and all of those who interact with elevators, it's paramount that we stay updated on continuing changes in our industry. With the various changes come the 2019 code updates, it is the various local authority having jurisdictions, or AHJs, interpretation as to the implementation of the code changes that is often misinterpreted. This is a very broad topic that is difficult to squeeze into our allotted time frame for this event, but our speakers today are going to attempt to provide insights that can assist us with these changes. Before I introduce the panelists, I'd like to thank everyone who attended our annual Spring Education Conference in Tucson, Arizona. It's fantastic to see so many industry friends face to face and get back to doing what we do together as an industry. I would like to give a plug for a couple of upcoming NAEC events that you want to be a part of. As you may know, we have announced that our annual convention and exposition will be relocated to the city of New Orleans for 2021. The event will be held on October 4th through 7th, which is a slight change from the original dates. So please check and update your calendars accordingly. It had been planned to take place in Atlantic City, but this change in venue gives the association the assurance that we will be able to hold the full event with our usual expected high attendance of around 2,000 attendees and exhibitors in the way that we have held it in the past. We will be announcing more details in June, along with opening the room block and registration. There's still space available for our supplier members to exhibit at the trade show, and you can get more information and sign up to exhibit at naec.org. I'm pleased to report, for those of you who may not have heard, that there's been a recent addition to NAEC staff, Dave Smart, who has come on board as the NAEC Global Education and Safety Officer. Many of you are familiar with Dave from his tireless work on behalf of the association while I was a member. I'd like to take this time to introduce Dave and let him say a few words about what he's working on.
Thank you, John. I just want to take this opportunity to let everybody know that we are currently working on the QEI program for NAEC, and we're in the final stages of developing a prep course, and that should be available to members soon. If they have any questions about that, they can contact me at david@naec.org. And we are continuing our work with the OSHA Alliance on safety throughout the industry and for the members. There should be some new documents that are going to be available to everybody within the next month or two on some of the finished products that we're working on. Again, that's all I wanted to bring up. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave, and welcome aboard in your new role. I, for one, am excited that you've joined us. So, with those housekeeping items out of the way, let's move forward with our town hall event. We'll be going through our panel individually in 3 segments. And then when all the panelists have had a chance to speak, we will ask some questions from the audience attendees. As you have questions, write them in the Q&A window or the chat screen. And we'll circle back to as many of them as time allows at the end. Please note with your questions, if it is a question that is specific for one panelist, or if it's a general question for the entire panel. We're going to try to be mindful of everybody's time today and make sure we wrap up no later than 3:30. I'd like to start by introducing the first member of our panel, Carl Burch. Carl is the Technical Support Director for Vantage and has worked in the elevator industry for over 33 years. He was Vice President of Automatic Elevator Incorporated and was Operations Manager for the Nashville branch of Kone Elevators and Escalators. He joined GAL Manufacturing in 2011. Carl has a Bachelor of Engineering degree in Electrical Engineering from Vanderbilt University and a Bachelor of Science degree from David Lipscomb College. He served on the Metropolitan Nashville City Council, and most importantly, as it relates to our discussion today, he's a member of the ASME A17 Standards Committee, Electrical Committee, Emergency Operations Committee, and Hoistway Committee. Carl is a certified elevator inspector and a certified elevator technician, and is a licensed professional engineer in the state of Tennessee and the state of New York. Carl, thanks for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, John. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll get started. So can everyone see the screen?
We've got it, Carl, thanks.
Excellent. So as John mentioned, I am the Technical Support Director for Vantage, and in my role at Vantage, I am involved in code development, and I am a member of multiple ASME A17 committees, and as you're aware, the A17 codes and standards are very important documents in our industry. And today we're going to review the A17 committee structure, as well as the interpretation and revision process. So ASME, of course, as you know, stands for the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. ASME develops many codes and standards, and A17 is ASME's numbering convention for elevators and escalators. And I just want to point out that this presentation is a general overview of ASME A17 code development information, and it is not intended to provide a complete detail of this information. However, the complete detailed information is available from ASME. So first want to talk about the codes and standards that ASME has developed for A17 elevators and escalators. The first item on the list there is ASME A17.1 2019 CSA B4419 Safety Code for Elevators and Escalators. As you know, this is the main document that we use in our industry. It's primarily the code and standard for new installations. There are a few exceptions to that. In part 1, section 5.10 as well, and sections 8.1, section 8.6, and section 8.12 actually apply to both new installations and existing installations. The next document is ASME A17.2 2020. That's the guide for inspection of elevators, escalators, and moving walks. And again, this is a guide for inspectors and provides a lot of information on the proper methods for inspecting elevators, escalators, and moving walks. The next document is ASME A17.3 2020. This is the safety code for existing elevators and escalators. And this is the code that when it's adopted by AHJs, is applied retroactively to installations. ASME A17.4 2015, the Guide for Emergency Personnel, is next. The next item is CSAB 44.1, which is also A17.5. That's the Guide for Elevator and Escalator Electrical Equipment. The next document is A17.6, which is the standard for means and methods for elevator suspension, compensation, and governor systems. Next document is A17.7, which is the performance-based safety code for elevators and escalators. If this standard is approved by an AHJ, it can be used in the application of section 1.2 of A17.1. Next document is ASME A17.8. It's the standard for wind turbine and tower elevators. The next document is ASME QEI-1, and that's the standard for qualification for elevator inspectors. And then the last item in the list is an actual technical report, A17.1-8.4, which is the guide for elevator seismic design. I want to talk a little bit about the A17 committee structure. The main committee for A17 is commonly referred to as A17 Standards Committee. If you view information on the website, you'll see that the title is also used as A17 Elevators and Escalators. So those two terms can both be used to refer to the main committee. The subordinate groups that fall within A17 are the working committees, which we'll talk about in a moment, the Regulatory Authority Council, or RAC. There are interest review groups, IRGs, and then there are also several ad hoc committees. Talk a little bit about the A17 working committees, and just want to note that this is just a partial list. There are many more working committees other than the ones listed here, but they include the Emergency Operations Committee, the Hoistway Committee, Mechanical Design Committee, the Electrical Committee, Existing Installations Committee, Hydraulic Committee, Escalator and Moving Walk Committee, and Code Coordination Committee. So depending on the particular issue at hand, whether it's an issue that has to do with some type of emergency operations, or has to do with a question about hoistway or mechanical design, will depend on which working committee is assigned a particular task. One of the items that we wanted to talk about today briefly is the process for code interpretations. Many times in the industry, as I'm sure you're aware, a question will come up about the application of a particular code requirement and how it's interpreted by a particular AHJ. And so there is a process in place, which you may be familiar with, that can actually provide an interpretation and then be published for the public. When a request for interpretation is submitted, and we'll talk about that in a moment about how to submit that interpretation, but you submit that by completing an online form, and there's a particular form that the interpretation request should take, and that there's a sample that is provided, but when the interpretation is asked, we ask that be asked in a form that can be answered in a yes or no answer. And then there's some other instructions about how to submit your interpretation request. Depending on what that request entails, or what part of the code that it is requested to be interpreted, then it is assigned to a specific working committee. The working committee reviews the request and proposes a response based on what the current code language is. The proposed response is then considered by the standards committee. If the standards committee approves the response, then the interpretation is issued. The next item that we want to discuss today is the process for code revisions. Oftentimes there will be issues that result in the need for a specific code revision, and we're going to talk about how that revision is processed. First, the working committee, again, that is assigned by that particular code requirement, considers the proposed technical revision. The working committee formulates a proposed revision as well as a rationale for the revision. The proposed revision is submitted for a review and comment ballot within the A17 committee groups. After the review and comment ballot is complete, the working committee considers further changes to the proposal based on the ballot comments that are submitted. The proposed revision is then submitted to the standards committee for a first consideration ballot. And during the first consideration ballot, the standard committee members can either vote to approve or disapprove the revision. During that balloting process, any disapproved votes must be considered, and further revisions may be needed to that proposed code revision. If other revisions are made, then that ballot or that proposed revision must go out again for another first consideration ballot. If the disapproved votes are chosen not to be accepted, then there has to be a rationale provided for rejecting or not accepting the disapproved votes. And then with any disapproved votes and the associated rationale, a recirculation ballot may be necessary in order to explain the decisions about not accepting a disapproved vote. So once the balloting process is complete, a consensus is reached, and the proposed revision is then approved by the standards committee. Once the proposed revision is submitted is approved, then it's submitted for public review, and those documents are available for the public during a time period to review and make comments, and then those comments are considered and possibly even further revisions after the public review. Once the public review is completed, the proposed revision is submitted to the Board of Safety Codes and Standards, and then the proposed revision is submitted to the American National Standards Institute for both of those approvals, and then following those approvals, the revision is published. So that's a quick review. Again, there's many other details involved in that process, but that's a quick overview of the time allotted, and so I want to open it up for questions at this time.
Well, thanks, Carl. I'm going to jump in here, and then we'll see if any questions come over the chat box to circle back on later. But for those in the audience, I guess, that have not had the pleasure to experience, whether it be a code week or visiting code meetings, there is so much that goes into the process. I've had the experience of going to a number of different code weeks and sitting in, and it's really hard to understand and fathom the amount of work that goes in to writing these codes. So first of all, I want to thank you and all of our panelists for today for their work that they're doing in that regard. But so if I'm in the audience and I have a question, I don't understand something that's in the code, it's unclear, whether it's an existing rule, whether it's a new code update, there's a process in place for me to get an answer to that question, right? Can you speak a little bit about that process?
That's right, John. And that's, I mentioned in the presentation, the request for interpretation. There is a formal process for that. And at this point in time, it's a process that is completed online. So from the ASME website, asme.org, there's a few navigation tasks to complete to get to the right place within the website, and there's an online form to submit. Again, the way that the form is laid out assists in providing the correct form of the question, and it has a lot of helpful information associated with that electronic form. So the process may take up to 6 months to get a question answered, or excuse me, an interpretation answered, and the reason is because of the timing of the meetings that occur. After a request is submitted, it will appear on the agenda for the next working committee meeting, and once that working committee has proposed a response, then it will go to the next standards committee meeting. So there's a sequence of meetings: the working committee meeting, and then the standards meeting before the proposed interpretation can be answered.
Great, thanks, Carl. We certainly appreciate those insights, and thanks for your time and for joining us today. Now going to introduce Don Holloway and Dave Mann, both with Kings 3. Don is an elevator mechanic, qualified elevator inspector, and Kings 3 field services manager. Don has been with Kings 3 Emergency Communications for 8 years and has been in the elevator industry for over 20. During that time, he's worked as a mechanic, service manager, inspector, and consultant. He carries a QEI with NAEC and a CETS with NAEC, in addition to 20 other state licenses across the country. Don also sits on the Electrical Code Committee with ASME. Since codes vary in their use and their adoption, he works closely with local jurisdictions to ensure compliance. Dave Mann is the Vice President of Technology of Kings 3, and he has built a career that has spanned more than 35 years in the emergency call center field. He is currently responsible for the technology group at Kings 3, including IT, software development, and product development. Throughout his career, Dave has designed, implemented, upgraded, redesigned, as well as retired and replaced innumerable systems, processes, business models, workflows, and building designs. Active in industry associations, he's been a frequent consultant, trainer, and a guest speaker. Gentlemen, thank you for being here, and I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, John. Let me go ahead and get things fired up here. Let's go. All right. So this is 3 things you need to know about the ASME IBC code updates. This is a version of the presentation that we have been giving for about the last 2 years. And so we were some of the first to be out in the field talking about the emergency communications aspect of the ASME 2019 code. We've already been introduced. Thank you very much for that, John. We'll go ahead and roll right into this.
All right. First of all, we appreciate everyone giving us the opportunity to present to you guys today. What we're going to do is going to go over today the 3 things we need to know about the ASME and IBC code updates. What we're going to try and do today is kind of give you a 60,000-foot view of the code, give you the information, the code data, and everything we're going to have inside the slides. We know that your time's important. We're on a limited time frame here, so we're going to be mindful of your time and try and give you the best overview and give you the documentation and information we can as well. First of all, let's talk about what the 3 things that we're going to give you the information about. With the code update here, we're looking at the 2-way communication portion of it is code changes related to the 2-way communication that we have existing now. Second, we're going to be looking at the video. We're going to be focusing in on the video portion of it, finding out what that pertains to, how it associates with the new code. Third, we're going to dial in the text portion. Let's see what the text has to do, where the screens and everything go in the system. The main thing to kind of pull back on this, we're going to be looking at additions, not subtractions. We're going to be adding things to the code and also enhancing the current code so it matches the new 2019 update. This section is going to be broke down for code updates for each individual one, for the 2.27, the different versions that are affected by this code. One of the easiest ways before we get into it as a comparison would be comparing this as like a Zoom meeting. We're all sitting here, you know, nowadays we know exactly how these meetings work. We're sitting here talking and all of a sudden Bob comes on and he's just moving his mouth and nobody hears him. Well, we can't see that. So all of a sudden we're going to start chatting and say, hey, Bob, your mic's muted. Say you go to the same thing. Well, if Bob's camera was off, now we don't know whether Bob's trying to talk or not. So in a great look at this code, what it's going to be doing is gives the opportunity for the operators that are answering, the authorized personnel that answers these calls to say, are you okay? Is something coming? Is something wrong? Can we help you? It could be a microphone that's not working. They could have had a medical incident, or they could have just, no one's in there at all. So with all this functionality, we're now going to have the ability to also communicate via text, use the video portion to find out where they're at and everything. As we see the current code updates, we're going to glaze over this stuff so that we give you the proper time and consideration. Currently, we have the hands-free device, 2-way communication, and answer within 24/7 with authorized personnel. The next slide we're going to go over is we currently have it, and all this hasn't changed. Location, identification, automatic answering, off-site communication cannot interfere with on-site communication, and telephone line status monitoring. All these are existing updates. As you can see here in these slides, we're going to have the blue as the highlighted changes and additions to. 2.27 we see here, we added a section of who can take appropriate action, the addition of the ADA codes and the AHJ. Also, the communication means shall be initiated when push the button is actuated. What does this mean? The person answering a phone needs to be able to take appropriate action. The call button must initiate a call. That's what we do now. It's rocket science, right? No, it's just a kind of a method of just writing codes. Think of ridiculous warning labels on very easy to use products. The next section on here, we're adding in a message shall be displayed, permitted to be extinguished where necessary to display a new message happens. On the same panel as the phone push button, a message shall be displayed, which permits authorized personnel to communicate with trapped passengers. And the next slide on this one gives, on the same panel as the push button, a message shall be displayed that is activated by authorized personnel. What does this mean? Elevator must have the ability for authorized personnel to send messages as well as receive responses from trapped passengers. This includes passengers that cannot speak or hear. Next section, you have on here, the means to display video to observe passengers in any location of the cab floor to authorized personnel. What does this mean? The elevator must have the capabilities for the authorized personnel to view the entire floor. This means when the operator calls in, now they're going to be able to see, is someone actually here? Is something wrong with them? Or is there no one in here at all? This section is the 2.27114. As all of us know, you have both the authorized personnel section and then the emergency personnel section. This is for units at over 60 foot of rise where you have to have what most of us refer to as master stations. This is an on-site communication that we are used to, where you pick the phone up, dial the car, it goes to it. These additions, as you can see, are highlighted in blue, called by emergency personnel and such on there. Once the communications have been established, a message shall be displayed on the same panel as the phone push button that is activated by emergency personnel to indicate that help is on the way. The message shall be permitted to be extinguished where necessary to display a message. Why is this important? Currently, many elevators only have a light to indicate the help is on the way. The new indicator will provide the clarity and additional reassurance for this. The issue with this, for everybody to take heed on, is as you're reading, this is for the master station's on-site personnel communications. So unlike now, it can't be just a phone. Now, the emergency personnel has to have the same responsibility of being able to view that video, text back and forth with that person inside of the cab. So the same functionality that the authorized personnel has to be the same process that the emergency personnel uses. So now we're looking at a different device. On the same panel as the phone push button, just like the other one, messages shall be displayed which permit emergency personnel to communicate with and obtain responses from trapped passengers. Why is this important? This provides additional support to those passengers who are speech and hearing impaired. This could be someone that can't verbally speak. There could be the microphone or speaker couldn't work. So this gives the ability to not have someone trapped without any type of communication at all. The means of display the video to observe passengers in a location of car floor. This, as you notice, is a repetitive of the original code that we stated earlier. Why is this important? The video feed into the cab provides emergency personnel with additional information to better assess the situation, to include the verifying whether a passenger is unconscious or simply nonverbal and perhaps called a false alarm, and there's no one in the elevator.
So this is the page that we use to demonstrate and summarize code changes over the years. And you know, I've had it mentioned to me a few times that, hey, this is all very new. Nothing's really changed for a very long time. And this is the summary version of the changes that have happened to the portion of code that it's important for Kings 3 to understand over the years. So there have been changes, but I would venture to say that there's been no changes quite so radical in emergency communications than the addition of the video and the text messaging capability. I think Don wrapped it up throughout the portion of the code that he was going over. You obviously still need the emergency phone. The audio portion, the two-way audio portion is still there. The video messaging system, this is the means by which messages can be displayed on the screen in the car itself. And the concept of the closed firewall and encrypted communications, we'll cover that a little bit later, but this is a definite change as far as the means that which you require connectivity to that elevator. This is no longer a twisted pair phone line. This is twisted pair phone line plus data or all data. So it is important to know that, you know, the code compliant system now, for those that have adopted this code, is no longer just a simple phone-based solution.
As you can see here, just like Dave was talking, we're giving a little bit faster presentation, going over this stuff as basically fine print of what you need to operate with, and the code is attached for your viewing as well. And we'll also be able to circle back for any questions. But as you see here, this is how the system actually works. You're going to have your standard COP, control operating panel, inside of the cab. Inside of there, you're going to have a display. Inside of that display, it can either be associated with the position indicator or a separate display, either way how the system works. You're going to have that display that's going to have a connection to the car top box, which also will be connected to a camera. That camera may be mounted on the front of the panel, be a fisheye camera, rear of the panel, looking over as long as it sees the entire car. Next, it's going to be connected into the machine room box. This is going to be the main interface that's also connected to the WAN connection for your data, as Dave was stating. Now we have not only a telephone connection, but we have a data connection, both that has to be ran here. Once we do the 18 gauge shield, it goes out to the lobby panel. This is the units above 60 foot of rise. So now we have the lobby panel that's also fed from this machine room. And as of currently right now, the emergency communication failure, which is a normal process that we're dealing with currently right now under code.
So this is a representation of what we see here at the call center when we're working with a video-enabled system. The left side is the record of the location, which tells us the address and which car and other information about the location, responders and things of that nature. On the right side is the video that is seen by the operator who's handling the particular event. They will see the video frame. To the right of that is the frame where they can type messages into the elevator to be displayed on the screen. Some of those buttons on the lower portion of the right side of the screen are the canned messages, because here we have a fairly routine script that we use, but we also have the ability to free-form questions into the elevator. The folks in the elevator respond to us in either a positive or negative. It's kind of like asking questions of the code committee. We have to form our questions as a yes/no question, because quite typically what's happening in the elevator is for some systems, the door open and door close button are repurposed for answering yes or no. There are some other systems that have actual dedicated buttons for the positive and negative response, but all the questions currently with all the product that's available now do have to be yes, no, because we're really either repurposing existing buttons or there's only 2 other buttons. There is not a full keypad in the elevator or a virtual keypad that shows up on the screen. This is a better view of the inside of the elevator. Typically, and while the code doesn't get as explicit as this, our advice to people is that we need to be able to see the entirety of the cab floor. I think the objective when we were working with or being able to comment during code creation was that it's more important to be able to see into the elevator and see the floor versus having identification grade video. In the case of what we're attempting to do, we're trying to see first off, is the elevator occupied? And we don't really need, the CSI forensic level of video for that. So there are certain elevators that, given the shape that they are and the places that we can actually place a camera, it may be a little more fisheye and a little more bent, but we can see that there's people in there. We can see that they're upright. We can make certain evaluations if we're unable to communicate with them in any way. This is a representation of the screen that the person in the elevator would see if, in fact, we're going to go ahead and use the messaging option with that person. And you can see that there are some of our pre-canned texted messages, and in this particular system, answering yes or no is accomplished through pressing door open for yes and door closed for no. So best practices for monitoring, and this is what Kings 3 does. Answering and dispatch issues are typically the result of non-emergency personnel handling these duties. So when you are finding people to monitor your elevators, I believe it to be incredibly important that you find people that this is really what they do. They're not an answering service. They are actually purposefully into elevator monitoring and get specially trained for those kinds of things. So the dispatch center, obviously, speaking to the points that I just made, the event should be handled by highly trained personnel. There should be policies and procedures that are very consistent from one event to the other. There should be ways of auditing the events that occurred by date, time, when calls came in, what actions were taken when, recordings of those calls, things of that nature. Not everybody that gets entrapped in an elevator is going to speak the same language as your dispatchers. So having a readily available resource that can handle and respond in other languages is also very important. And the redundancy of the center that is taking your calls is also very important. You know, just having one location or, you know, one internet circuit or anything that is numbered in ones is always really bad. So you want, you know, double and triple redundancies for those capacities to get those calls in, process those calls, and be able to make notifications to emergency personnel to get people out of elevators.
All right, and just the additions, the additions recap. Elevator communication must include two-way communications, messaging capabilities for those who are hearing and speech impaired, include video capability, and the display and message, not just a light to indicate that there has been received and help is on the way. The video portion, just like we said, it can be achieved by both the fisheye type, whether the camera is mounted, and that's like I said, and as we went over with sections in the code as well, it says that you must view the floor. So I know that there's been some question in different events that we've done about how much of the area is looked over. Is it all four corners? Is it everything? It says that you must be able to see the floor. The aspect of the codes is to see if someone is in there, just like David talked to. If someone's incapacitated, if there's someone in there that can't speak, so that gives you the information that they're there. When do these rules apply to me? This code will only apply to the elevators permitted for new construction and modernization alteration after the code is adopted by the state. Where the elevator is located, it will not impact existing elevators which are not undergoing modernization. ASME does not enforce code. Individual states have adopted ASME as their standard and select their timeline for adoption. We have a link here. It's also going to be in the presentation for you to check and see what for code compliance for that state and everything else. This also is going to be a good question we had coming up. What's the comparison difference between the 2018, 2021 comparison of IBC? Because there are some states, Georgia and others, that actually have the 2018 adopted, which that means they fall under the emergency two-way communication update, but haven't adopted the 2019 code. This is a IBC adopted code, so then that would fall underneath of their modernization. So as you can see, there has been one great difference in between an emergency two-way communication shall be provided, and then on the 2021 difference on there, you're seeing the difference of the two. 2018 is a visual text-based and video-based 24/7 live interactive, a fully accessible by deaf and hard of hearing, speech impaired, and shall include voice only options for hearing individuals. Has the ability to communicate with emergency personnel utilizing existing video conference technology, chat, text software, and or other approved technology. This was kind of a first iteration was sent out, and it did throw kind of a snafu into a few people and not understanding what that meant. Was it, do I need to talk to someone live? Do I need the two-way video? So in 2021, they cleaned that up as to go along with the A17-1 2019 adoption that you read as well, that goes through when operating in each mode, include a live interaction system that allows both back and forth conversation between the elevator occupants and emergency personnel. 2, is operational when the elevator is operational. 3, allows elevator occupants to select the text-based and audible mode depending on the communication needs to interact with emergency personnel. These themselves are going to be the states that we're going to have currently, and this is going to change at a given moment sometimes, but these currently are the ones that we have that have adopted the 2019, and also the states that have adopted the IBC.
Guys, that's our presentation. If you have any questions, I see that there's some questions waiting for us in the chat. I will do my best to answer those questions that I can, and Don will probably also have to answer some of the more code-specific questions. But if there's anything that we can assist you with directly, feel free to go ahead and contact us directly, and we'll be glad to share what information we have with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave and Don. I actually have 2 questions. I'll try to make it short if I can. The first is, if I'm in a jurisdiction that has adopted the 2018 IBC, but is on a earlier version of A17-1, whether it be 2016, 2013, et cetera, I've got a conflict in the code. Can you speak to that a little bit? Understanding each AHJ is different.
Right. We had the same situation actually come up on us, and like you said, we've got quite a few systems now that are online, not a handful that are actually online with us. And the same thing, it was one of the states like that was Georgia. They did their modernization, followed the A17-1, but didn't pay close enough attention that 2018 had been adopted. So when the inspector came in, they said, well, where's your visual and text base? They said, well, wait a minute, I'm on, 2013. And it was like, no, you've adopted the 2018. That means that code is enforced at this time. So must keep a good look at where your state's at, where it's adopted the IBC, not just your A17-1, because the IBC can be enforced to make you do the updates as well.
Second follow-up question. I spent some time earlier in my career as an elevator technician, and we're just notorious about loving to work on phones.
Yeah.
So this is a big change for elevator techs, and traditionally we're used to working with shielded pair, and that's the extent for the most part. Now we've got this introduction of a data connection.
Yeah.
So ultimately, how is that delivered?
So the data connection to the elevator, most of the manufacturers now are including in the system a media converter, which converts the Ethernet in the beginning of the elevator, the Ethernet down to a pair of wires down to the machine room, where that's then converted back to Ethernet. So typically today, there's not really a requirement to have a network cable between the machine room and the elevator. So that's really not necessary. But the other half of this is it really changes the customer deliverable. Whereas you used to tell the customer, hey, we need a phone line, and they could provide the phone line for you. Now they really need to be able to provide a good WAN connection to the outside world. And of course, a lot of customers are either, some customers that's going to be well beyond them to know what to order properly and how to do that. Or some will say things like, well, we have a network, so you just can connect to that. And I think we all know that's going to introduce certain wrinkles to it. So the customer deliverable gets more complicated for the customer. Now, bigger companies that have their own IT departments, the first thing they're likely going to request is, please don't put the elevator on my network. And further, if you give pushback, they really do need to set up separate VLANs for that, make sure that nothing from the general network can access the elevator side of the network and vice versa. And then also provide that connectivity to the outside world. And then, this is emergency communications. And is it emergency communications on a casual network? Now they probably need to program in some QoS so their Netflix 4K downloads aren't interfering with, the elevator communications. And depending on how the voice is delivered, if it's delivered through the unit, now everything regarding all the network connectivity all the way through the building now has to follow all of those rules as well, with the 4-hour battery and whatnot. So it has become much more complicated. We've successfully bypassed a lot of that complication for on the part of the customer through the provision of specific cellular data routing capabilities, which takes everything off the network and kind of returns us back to the world where, hey, just plug this into here, and then that's that, and it's over. So yeah, the customer deliverables got a lot more complicated for sure.
Well, thank you both for sharing those insights. And you guys have some great resources on your website, which you mentioned. And I've also seen some questions kind of coming in through the panel. This video is being recorded and will be available live on the NAEC website here shortly, along with all of the presentations from the presenters. So certainly some more information will be available forthcoming on those issues. So thank you guys for that. Next on our panel is Chris Strawn. Chris is president of Elevator Safety and Technical Services, a training and technical services company that provides nationwide training for elevator continuing education, otherwise known as CEUs. He also provides expert witness services for litigation involving vertical transportation accidents. Chris has more than 28 years experience in the elevator industry and sits on ASME A17-1 hydraulic, maintenance repair replacement, and wind turbine tower elevator committees, and provides continuing education credit for renewal of elevator personnel certifications, including QEI and NAEC, and certifications for mechanic licenses in many jurisdictions and states. So Chris, thanks for joining us, and floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, John. Welcome, everybody. It's been some good information so far. I got to go ahead and get started here because, you know, I could be a little long in the tooth. That's the wrong screen. Why is it not sharing this screen? Go back. Okay, please tell me why this is not doing right.
If you stop your share there, Chris, and then
Okay.
try to start it again, and you just have to pick the little window that pops
Yeah,
up.
I
that
know
you
I
can flow
did.
there.
Share. And it goes to the wrong screen. It says you're sharing that screen, but it is not. That screen is over here. Huh. All right, let me see. Let me share.
Hey Trip, while Chris is trying to get that, do we have a question that maybe we can throw in here?
Yeah, going through the chat. One of the questions is there some place where our company could get some basic training on Braille codes?
Am I sharing it now?
You are, Chris, and then you just gotta, I guess, looks like pick what you're.
Okay. Can you see that? Everyone see that? Is that okay?
Yes, it looks good.
Okay. All right. First of all, I have to give the acknowledgement every year from ASME about the use of their materials. Starting last year, they started requiring us to do this. And I just want you to know that we have every edition of the code back to 1921 edition, and including what's required for QEI 1 compliance. I know that some of this has been touched on today, but just remember that the 2019 code is incorporates all changes from the 2016 A17-1 B44. The effective date is June 30th, 2020. That's important because some jurisdictions, like in the state of Alabama, automatically adopt the new code 6 months after the effective date. So in some jurisdictions, the 2019 is already effective. Of course, it applies conditionally to new and existing equipment, with some sections applying to both new and existing, including Part 1, which includes your definitions. 510 for elevator construction, 8.1 is your security, 8.6 maintenance, 8.7 alterations, 8.8 welding, 8.9 3 paragraphs, that's your code data plate, and 8.10 and 11 are, and now 12, of course, are all testing. As Carl brought up in the first segment about the need to ask questions, or actually just to get involved. Don't forget that you know, being a part of our industry also gives you unique insight into what's going on and how the codes apply to the work that's being done. And we need you to be involved. More than ever, we need people in our industry to get in here with us and mix it up a little bit. You might notice too that, and I saw one of the questions earlier about A17-6, if the jurisdiction doesn't adopt A17-6. Well, in the front of the book, for the jurisdictions that don't adopt A17.7 performance-based code, the acknowledgement in the front of the book tells you that that compliance is achieved by complying with A17.1 or A17.7. So therefore, performance-based codes are adopted by reference. Now, A17.6 would be another incident for adoption or use by the AHJ by reference, because if you go to anything to do with suspension means, it's now going to refer you over, including the A17, the inspector's guide, is going to refer you over to A17.6. There are many changes in the code this year. The addition, this edition of the code, just like recent edition, uses hard metric units where practical. Calculations for speed and load use both the hard and the imperial units. If you've been through the code book enough, you probably already know, and many times there isn't a real, precise equivalent between the two. Change in terms. 2019 edition included the addition of or replacement with detection means. So if you use contacts, now you may be using, or door or gate contact, you may be using detection means. Basically, a means of detecting a door or gate is closed or a circuit's complete. Some revisions result in the reorganization of rules without any real change, and include the use of a conjunction like and. So it said you will comply with 1 and 2 and 3 versus complying with the following and name them out 1, 2, 3. Simple adjustments, not necessarily new. There are some updated and there are some new terms this year. Car door interlock is they changed the definition to add electrical protective device. So anytime that you have something in the circuit that protects that circuit, it's going to be determined to be an electrical protective device. We've added door lock detection means an electrical protective device used to remove power from the driving machine and motor. Most things that are dubbed electrical protective devices do remove power from the driving machine, motor, and brake. Dynamic braking, new for escalators and moving walks. And that's hopefully going to modernize escalators and moving walks a little bit. Executable software, just the recognition that we do use software in the elevator industry and the controller industry, and that the software has changes, and these changes can promote alterations. They can they have unique software identifiers. This information is going to be required for newer units to be, or altered units where they're installed under this code, to include tagging or indication of the information about the software addition that controls certain circuits identified mostly in 226 or 326. Fire service access elevators are new. Manual reset for private residence elevators. It's a big deal. So some things are going to require a manual reset by elevator personnel. It's going to be difficult to have a button in your house that you in a private residence that the private resident doesn't have access to. It could be interesting moving forward. And then relocation of an escalator or moving walk. Not really sure why you would, but it is possible. Restrictor, software-based perimeters, as I said, unique software identifiers, and manually operated valves. One of the key changes in the front, in the pits for elevators, is the recognition that you can, for sump pumps in elevators provided with emergency operation, a drain or sump pump shall be provided. The sump pump shall be required to remove a minimum of 3,000 gallons per hour per single hoistway or multiple hoistway. So this is just saying that instead of for a duplex, you got to have 6,000 gallon pump, you got to have 3,000 gallon pump. Other requirements that are newer, like working areas in the pit, guarding against being exposed to that mechanical hazard. Control spaces were added to the machine room's control room. Control spaces as a list of places requiring enclosures or authorized for permanent access and communications. Electrical wiring. See the caption: in jurisdictions enforcing the NBCC or NFPA 72, a means for testing fire alarm initiating devices without having to enter the hoistway will be permitted when this means is provided that shall comply with A or B, which is allow smoke sample or air sampling detectors, or allows an enclosure at the top of the hoistway that is accessible from outside of the hoistway. There are, let me go back here. There are several requirements that involve the size of the opening, the rating of the opening. So it's going to be rated to equal the fire rating of the hoistway. It's going to have a minimum of 16 by 16 access or a maximum, because full bodily entry is not allowed or not necessary. You're going to have a 16 by 16 maximum enclosure that'll reject a what is it, 6mm 1/4 inch ball. Reopening devices. This has been on a lot of people's minds, I know, along with the emergency communications, and I have some just some basic information about it. I can tell you that, you know, you need to get with your manufacturer of your reopening devices to determine how they're complying it and what they're doing and their testing methods. You can, for reopening devices, of course, you can render reopening devices inoperative under certain conditions when closing under reduced energy or reduced kinetic energy. Detection of approaching objects within 18 inches of the fully closed position, you can de-energize the reopening device, or when the door is within 3/4 of an inch. Where phase 1 operation or phase 1 firefighter service is not provided, doors closing using reduced energy automatically after 20 seconds of detecting an object in the path. When reopening device is inoperative, continuous notification, which is a buzzer tone 10 decibels above ambient, not more than 80 decibels, measured in front of the opening, and in no time shall the notification exceed 85 decibels from inside of the car. And there's about 40 inches high. If you're in the passageway, it's 20 inches in front of the opening. If you're in the car, it's 14. For approaching objects, you know, this year we've got detection of approaching objects, and we've added cylinders. Now you can go back and look at some of the graphics that are provided in non-mandatory S, but basically this includes an 8-inch diameter cylinder that is 40 inches in height and approaches the door at 1 meter per second or 3 feet per second. We use, I've only had one manufacturer describe their operation to us, and it was at an association meeting not that long ago. The detective colors are obviously in white and black. Detecting the cylinders 9 inches ahead of the leading edge of the door may be rendered ineffective 18 inches from closed up to the fully closed position. And as I said, the prism and cylinder detection examples are in non-mandatory S in the back of the book. The system is required to be self-monitoring, and you're going to have to provide the method for testing it and maintenance that's going to be part of your MCP. Top emergency exits. If you got MRL, traction MRLs that fall in the overhead, which they all do, and you can't get up there to the equipment, now you're going to at least be able to go up through the emergency exit, which is allowed to be keyed. There have been a lot of questions about this over recent years about how people get up into the overhead. And frankly, I don't know if you got a traction elevator that's in the overhead with a problem with the machine and brake, you're going to have to figure out a way and maybe potentially get a variance from your AHJ. I already know that in my local AHJ, the variance was refused. Restricted opening. There is a new testing requirements for restrictors that have moving parts. Looks like maybe they're trying to get away from restrictors that have moving parts. But if you have any moving parts on your restrictor, there are engineering tests that over or about 1 million cycles under various conditions. Make sure you go to 214 and look that up. Closed position of car doors with a car door interlock. Changed from 3/8 of an inch for the last 20 years. We went to 1 1/4 inches. I don't have a justification for that, but it is an interesting move. Capacity and data plates, including a change for crosshead data plate that requires the inclusion of your minimum and maximum percentage of counterweight overbalance. Capacity and data plates references a new section in 813. 813 has 3 subsections that specifies requirements for permanent plates like data and capacity plates, signs like warning signs, etc., that are part of ANSI 535.2 or CSAC 22. Marking plates and tags like for safeties and door operators. All of that stuff now is in the new section. You can be sure that elevator inspectors are going to be looking for this stuff. So you're going to need to be up to date on that. Executable software. Again, I included just one reference, but executable software, including the unique software identifier, is applicable to electric traction, hydraulic, escalator, moving walks, etc. So where you have a unique software or executable software incorporated in with your controls, just know that if you make certain changes, and you got to pay attention back in 8.7 to the alteration section, if you make certain changes, then change certain devices or change the software for certain devices, then it may be considered an alteration. So pay attention to what's going on. These are just a few of the devices that are incorporated with this requirement. Software-based perimeters are permitted and shall not modify the unique software identifier when adjusted or selected in the field. Emergency operations, emergency communications, and as we talked about earlier, has been revised to recognize changes to the 2018 IBC when the push button is activated on the same panel as the push button. Now, I will tell you about the question that Mr. Holloway answered earlier, that the building code is for new elevators unless specified otherwise, but the AHJ has the authority to make a rule saying that we'll accept it this way, or under the new standard, that if you add or change emergency communications, that you will add the currently adopted version. Most jurisdictions don't operate that way, but some individuals may. So be familiar with the way that your jurisdiction operates. I will say that in most jurisdictions, you can just go in, do a simple Google search and type in elevator safety and your jurisdiction. Elevator safety Missouri, elevator safety Colorado, elevator safety Alabama or Florida. It's the same. Then you will find what the law is, and then the rules that the AHJ uses to enforce the law. And hopefully that will give you some information about, now for larger jurisdictions, Florida, California, New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia, sometimes you go to these larger places and the rules are a lot more frequently used versus, if you're in a rural community in Pennsylvania. So it's very important to know how to find the rules that you're going to be using and to be in touch with or familiar with your AHJ and how they operate. Elevators used by firefighters. This is a new section for fire service access elevators. This is also in the IBC. Occupant evacuation elevators. For buildings equipped with occupant evacuation elevators, there are some changes. Briefly, you have these contiguous zones for evacuation. You're going to have a method to determine how many people are in the lobbies or how many people might be necessary to evacuate. You're going to have an indication on the floor of how long it will take for an elevator to arrive, even when it's less than a minute. You're going to have load control for the elevator. After 60 to 80%, the doors are going to automatically try to close and take you to the discharge level to get you out of the building. On the reopening device will be de-energized, but the door open button will still work. You're going to go, if you overload the elevator, the doors are going to reopen. It's going to say the elevator is overloaded. The system has some choices to make. It can automatically initiate the call for another elevator, or you can push the button. It'll be required to assign an elevator to it already. So if you are the one that has to get out, you should be able to look up and see this required signage that says another elevator is arriving in X amount of time. Hydraulic section. Previously required hydraulic machine is located in the hoistway. The required pressure gauge fitting shall only be accessible to Group 1 personnel from outside the hoistway. Now, a pressure measurement means accessible from outside of the hoistway only by elevator personnel shall be provided for one of the following methods: a pressure gauge fitting, pressure sensing means display, shut-off valves, revised and renumbered. When the hydraulic machine is located inside the hoistway, operation of the shut-off valve shall be located so it's accessible from outside the hoistway, Group 1 operation. Manual lowering valve is revised. Added means to manually operate the valve with the lowering position marked. When the machine is in the hoistway, the valve or means to operate it shall be from outside the hoistway. Pressure switch changed its title from pressure switch to pressure sensing means. Escalator moving walks. There are a few changes, mostly having to do with either dynamic braking or the unique software identifier. As I mentioned earlier, dynamic braking for escalators and moving walks will mean that you use the motor and the machine to slow down and stop the escalator or moving walk, and that's when the power can be removed. In earlier editions, the activation of even a stop switch meant the removal of power from the emergency or from the brake and the drive machine. Now that power is not removed until it has stopped, and then without intentional delay, the power shall be removed from the driving machine and brake. There's also a newer requirement for skirt panels. Whenever they are provided, they have to be labeled with the OEM information. That information also carries over to any future replacements that may accommodate or be coming in for whether it's an alteration or a replacement. Residential elevators. For those out there in the residential world, there are a lot of commercial requirements moving over also into the residential community. You need to be familiar with these. It's a lot of information to try to give you today, but just know that there is a lot of information from the commercial hydraulic and electric section that is now being incorporated, including access of equipment for maintenance and purposes, and to protect it others from exposure to moving parts and stuff like that when it's installed in a room with other equipment. An 18-inch unobstructed permanent path to equipment where it's installed in machine space or control space with other equipment. Also for equipment installed or controllers installed in the hoistway. that you can't access through the car. You're going to have a means either from accessing outside of the hoistway, or you may do it from the car top. A lot of changes for residential elevators. Maintenance. One of the biggest things I can tell you about maintenance, so that we don't go long, is that in Appendix Y, a non-mandatory Appendix Y in the back of the book, you need to be familiar with what's required. If you're in a jurisdiction enforcing A17-1, 2000 or later, you got an MCP. You need to be familiar with what's required to be on site or accessible from on site. Those are your critical points. Available, your maintenance control program is available for viewing on site by elevator personnel. Instructions to locate the MCP must be posted. On-site documentation, written documents kept on site include wiring diagrams, code identified written unique procedures where you have it, or code identified checkout procedures for certain devices, maybe your new phone system or your new reopening device, emergency evacuation and transparent enclosure cleaning procedures, on-site maintenance records, viewable on-site, MCP records, also a record of your repairs is required to be viewable on site. Replacements also required to be viewable on site. And other records like your oil use log. Now I'll tell you, if you've got authorized personnel filling out your monthly fire service requirement, if you've got them executing that, they need to be trained. Authorized indicates some level of training. They need to know whether it's working, not follow the instructions, but whether it's working properly, so that they can report that to elevator personnel for correction. That becomes part of these records. And that's a big part of it. I appreciate your time.
All right, Chris, thank you. Obviously there are so many changes in the 2019 code. I mean, we could spend 2 days talking about it. So to try to cram it in to today's session is very challenging, but, we certainly appreciate you trying to give a high level overview, on the subject. So we do have a couple of questions that have come in the Q&A, and we only have about 13 minutes left. So I want to make sure that we try to give some appropriate time to those questions. And then if we have a few minutes left, maybe I'll circle back, Chris. I do have one or two thoughts in mind, but I want to see if I can at least give appropriate time to what's come in. So Tripp or Shannon, I'm not sure who's going to kind of go through the questions here. And I'll ask the panelists if you're still with us to, come back on, because we're not sure exactly who these questions are going to be for. So Tripp.
All right. The question that I had started with earlier is there some place that our company could get some basic training on Braille codes? And this question is for anyone. Chris?
Well, first of all, you got to be a little more specific, but I'm just trying to get my screen back up here. There you go. No. I don't even know what screen I'm on anymore. But the ADA gives you the requirement for where Braille may or may not be required. Okay, so that's where you're going to, if I'm still on here, am I still on?
Yes.
Yeah, you're on.
Yeah, you're
Okay.
on.
Okay, so your ADA or your ADAG, well, in some cases, ABAG, the architectural barriers accessibility. Now, remember, this is the oldest requirement for accessibility in the country. It dates back to the 60s, which, by the way, is not that old. So if you want to know where Braille is required, with throughout the elevator system, or just accessibility in general, you might use the accessibility guidelines, the ADAG. You can, normally these are downloadable from your jurisdiction or from the federal government. So now some jurisdictions, like where I physically live or am right now in Florida, Florida takes all of the ADA guidelines and incorporates them into their, they use that as a minimum, and then they incorporate it into their own volume called the Florida Accessibility Code. Not many jurisdictions do that, but some do, where they have a lot of vertical transportation requirements or a lot of older people.
Very good. Thank you, Chris. Another question is coming from Robert Masterson. To kind of paraphrase it, is there a way to rewrite the code or have the code attached to a detailed interpretation if needed? And I think what Robert's referring to there is that there is, if you look in books of law, there are books that just list the law straight out in a way that's kind of incomprehensible. And then there's the law books annotated, which talks about the legal cases then that have impacted them and made even some sections of the law no longer relevant. And so I suppose also what embedded in Robert's question is, what is the process for the next iteration of code updates, and how can the elevator and escalator community be involved in those changes to maybe see what they want to see in the code, as well as push for that annotation that he's talking about? And this is for anybody. Carl, talking a little bit about how the process works at the beginning. So maybe Carl, if you wanted to touch on this.
Yeah, I'll attempt to answer that. So the rationale for changes that are proposed changes in the code language are typically provided during the process that I described earlier today. Those rationales are not published with the code. Okay, so there is a handbook that is published that provides commentary on code requirements as well. But the rationale, if you're wanting to see rationale for a particular code change, then it's important to be involved in the public review of those documents so that you can see what the rationale is during the process of the consideration of the proposed change, because those rationale are not published with the actual code.
Carl, if I may, I will say that it's very difficult sometimes for each committee to formulate rules with a purpose that will not specifically eliminate somebody's. I'm right there with you, Robert. I want to be forthright. I want drive it home and get all the good information out there that we need in the field. I'm a field guy too, and but that there's a process that we use, and it's used over time, and it does work. Most of the changes are driven by the need to incorporate newer equipment without eliminating the specific. So it's tough, but again, get involved. That's the best way to it's the best suggestion I have for it.
Thank you, Chris. I would like to add one other point to the public review draft document. So as changes are approved during the cycles before the next revision of the code is published, there will be a public review time period for these changes, and those documents, the public review draft, does have the rationale as part of that document. So that is the time where you can actually view the rationale, and then you can participate in comments during that time as well.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Carl. Those are most of the questions. Others are in the chat and in the Q&A. Some of them have been answered, some of them are tagging on to others, but that's the large part of the questions that have been presented so far. So I guess I turn it back over to you, John.
Okay, great. It looks like we still do have about 5 minutes. So Chris, I'm going to circle back with a question that I had for you, if you don't mind. MCP, this thing's been around for a while, right? I mean, it's been in the code in some way, shape, or form since 2000. Obviously, it's gone through a number of iterations. But I spend a fair amount of time in machine rooms, as do most of us. And there's still struggles in this regard. And I know you talked about it, but what records are required to be on site per the MCP? And if you can, in the amount of time, maybe differentiate the difference between being available to elevator personnel, not just the elevator mechanic.
Okay, thanks, John. Well, okay, on site, actually physically on site, very few records must be there. We're looking at wiring diagrams, written or unique procedures for performing maintenance or tests, code identified checkout procedures, as I said, checking your phone system, maybe a particular piece of equipment has a special procedure. If you've got equipment installed or approved that's unique seal rating or approved under A177, it may have special testing procedures, etc. That stuff is required to be on site. And then, of course, your emergency evacuation procedures identified in A174, which is what most people default to. And people that are, say, for instance, they're the people that are trained for cleaning the glass enclosures that are outside of the car. If you have that kind of access panel, which is permitted, then you may need to have training with people that with using a guide like this, the emergency evacuation procedures, to train them, because there's unique safety features involved, or there's risk involved in any time that you can reach or handle something outside of the elevator car. Now, there is viewable on site means that there is some method. You might have an electronic, you may have a computer on site, you might have an iPad or a tablet. You may say there's directions to go down to the manager's office where they hit F1 and it goes to the records, and you can view these records from there. Now, obviously, if there is no manager's office or nowhere on site to do that, then you have to provide some method for viewing those when they are kept remotely. Now, also, I stated about the laws in your jurisdiction. Now, the laws in your jurisdiction usually are accompanied with rules, and the rules are a describing method for the AHJ to enforce the law. Within those rules, they may also describe different requirements for viewable versus physically on site. Just know that if it's viewable from on site, there has to be a method provided and directions for locating that posted on the controller or the means necessary for the test. If for some logs that are required, or excuse me, for some equipment that's required to be on site, viewable on site, like your repair and your replacement log. So you're always going to have a record of all your calls and stuff like that, and these are going to have to be viewable from on site. Other records that are kept on site are your oil use log, firefighter service operation, periodic tests, and then any of your special A176 replacement criteria for your suspension if you have an alternative suspension means or governor system.
Great, thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. I think that's an area that we're getting better at, but we still have a little work to do as an industry. But I think we're getting better.
Of the 8.6 is now 25 pages from original. It was 11. So it's getting really big.
All right. So with that, we've come to our time. So we're come to the end of this town hall event. Appreciate everyone that has joined us today. Especially appreciate the panelists who have shared their time and expertise with us today. And we will be holding more town hall events like this one later in 2021. So look for those announcements coming soon. And thanks to everybody for coming.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, John.
Is it over?
I think it's over.
So we were the only two dumb enough to hang
That's
around?
it. That's it. We're the only ones that didn't get in fast enough, Chris. We're racking up as, oh goodness,
You know,
they're going to be their mics, Keith.